a huge study that came out, Understanding LGBTQ Needs in Spartanburg County, which was published in 2018. And PFLAG was on that panel, along with several mental health agencies, workers, and LGBTQ organizers. And shortly after that fall, Tana and I had heard about some mutual friends whose children went to school with a 12 or 13-year-old transgender youth who had chosen death by suicide. And they had been bullied in school. And I guess it was just a very tough situation. That school has since made some changes and amenities to how they do things. And they also have a gay straight alliance in that school, which is actually the first middle school gay state alliance in Spartanburg County. And there was also a suicide of another youth here in Spartanburg County right around the same time. So several of us, PFLAG had already been exploring how to get a youth group together and had gotten a therapist to do some pro bono work and run a youth group at the same time as our PFLAG meetings on Thursday nights. And once we heard about these local suicides and the needs assessment information was out there, we had the data. Several of us, including Tana, were joined together, and we all decided that, we were just going to move forward with this. And I know Gretchen has a video, which doesn't have to be shown at the moment, but so PFLAG went ahead, and our other co-founder of Uplift, Eric Nolly, came up with the idea of the Rainbow Masquerade Ball, which raised about $15,000. And that is what started Uplift. And Uplift opens its doors in August 27th, 2019. So yes. Is there anything you want to add?
I don't think so. I still get shaken so much whenever I think about, just youth suicides in general, and then also to think that those are the ones that we know of, and but just statistically speaking, we know that there are more as well, or attempts, because those don't often get reported. Right. And something I didn't mention in my intro is that whenever I lived in Oklahoma for the last 5 years I lived there before moving here, there was a LGBT youth group that I worked with there as well. And so working with youth is something that I really enjoy, and something that I tend to get back to regardless of the different areas that I work with. And so anyway, just really happy to be doing the job that we like so much, and the job that we're just really, I guess people talk about the job that they're called to do, and I guess I felt like I was about to say that, but like, I don't know, it's just it's we often talk about so Uplift Outreach Center is coming up on 2 years in August, and Deb likes to say that it's just kind of taken on a life of its own, because we just can't keep up. I mean, which is as we all know in the field that we're working in, that can be a good feeling or a bad feeling, or depending upon the day, can change a bit. So but plain and simple, Uplift exists to provide safe space for LGBTQ youth. And so some of the terminology that I've started using lately is that we just provide the space, and whether that space be in person or online, we just create that space, and they provide peer support to one another. So we're there for them, if they need us. But what's really important is that they're not just coming to talk with us. I mean, sometimes they are, but they're there to talk with each other. And so I know 2020 was hard on everyone. But Uplift in particular, what happened is that we were only meeting for in-person meetings for roughly 6 months, a little bit over 6 months before we closed for in-person meetings. And so we, springboarded into virtual meetings pretty quickly. And the virtual meetings take place via Discord. And for those of you all that haven't heard of Discord before, that platform it started off as a gaming platform. And so, so it's really popular amongst youth and teenagers and tweens and young adults. And so we talk a lot about how we really like to listen to the youth and listen, be directed by them. And so whenever one of the youth members who actually had been involved in person, but not to a really great degree, kind of found his niche, and that's kind of what he does is create these Discord servers, is what they're referred to as. And he said, "Hey, I've got an idea." And, then, he and I and Deb talked, and we're just like, Deb and I had questions, and, it was something we'd never heard of before. And we just kind of took a leap of faith with it. And I kind of feel like whenever people were asking us, adults, in our community, community colleagues, I guess, that we have, what our plans were, and we told them that we were meeting through Discord, we got a lot of funny looks, like, "Oh, you're not going to meet through Zoom." And it's kind of like whenever parents started joining Facebook and youth, got off and, went somewhere else and, opened up Instagram and accounts and so forth. That's kind of how they felt about Zoom, is they're like, "Well, I don't want to do Zoom meetings. My parents do Zoom meetings, so that must not be cool," And so, so anyway, we got a lot of people that, really just kind of thought that we were weird for making that decision. And then what's funny is that now so many other youth groups, in neighboring cities and neighboring states have turned back around, and they're using Discord as well. So it was not due to any smart move that we made. It was total luck. And fortunately, we see Deb and I have I guess, as both being mothers, just, sometimes you just got to go with, the gut feeling. And we knew that we needed to create that space, and we knew that it was going to be needed since they were going to be meeting in person. And so, so anyway, I'm probably going on too much about that, but it was really important. And I think that one thing that we have learned during that process is about how many youth would be able to get plugged into, I say services a lot. It's just, working 20 years in social work, even if it's, more low key than that and more non-traditional, but plugged into, having resources and having that peer support for one another, is that it's taught us that even whenever we return to in-person meetings, that we'll probably have some component that still meets virtually, because whether youth aren't out to their parents, or whether they're just too far away to be able to come to the in-person meetings. Of course, whenever we were meeting for in-person meetings before COVID hit, there were youth coming, their parents were driving an hour one way to be able to bring them to the meetings, because that's how much they believed in the support that was being provided in the space. And we had another youth that their mom always said that anytime Uplift doors were open, their kid was there, and that was really heartwarming as well. And so just trying to give you all, I don't mean to be spending too much time on this, but just trying to give you all a background and, some knowledge about where we come from and what we do, because I think then it's a lot easier to kind of understand the material and kind of process it and so forth. Community got left out, even though we're so rehearsed in seeing LGBT Q, you know, the T doesn't often get included as often. We're doing, in society, we're doing a little bit better about that now. And so I'm excited to see that those were included, as well as, you know, acknowledging brown and Black folks as well. So increasing understanding of empathy and how to be inclusive, that's really good. Reading over these answers, letting them know that you want to know more. I think that that's absolutely right. And another thing that we talk a lot about is it's okay not to know something. Just to be honest about it, you know, and not, you know, pretend to know more than what we really do. And I think that showing a little bit of vulnerability and just admitting to someone, hey, you know, that's not something that I know much about, you know, and I know that sometimes that's hard to do for whatever reason. If maybe we feel like, oh, you know, I'm a professional and I've been doing this for a while and I really should know more about this. But, you know, whenever you're able to be a little bit vulnerable with someone, whenever folks are with me, I know I respect them a little bit more, you know, or a whole lot more. And then it gives the person an opportunity to be able to tell you, you know, what they want to say and how, you know, they need to be treated, or if there's anything about the services that need to be, you know, amended a bit in order to be more inclusive. Impossible to be therapeutic without understanding. Yes, very specific needs. That's very, very right on, Emily. And thank you for using your pronouns there in your name on your Zoom. We'll talk about the importance of that in a little bit. Intersectionality, yes, we talk a lot about intersectionality because it's complex, you know, because, you know, there can be so many layers, but the more we talk about it, the more we understand it and the more simple it becomes, and the more we're able to just respect other people and respect the need for why it's important to understand and acknowledge and welcome that diversity in people. So, oh, one other question I was going to ask is, of course, by some of your titles, I could kind of tell, but do most of the participants here today work with youth? Probably most of the people in the room, I'm thinking. And so we shared some about how we like to really listen to the youth that are participants, youth group members at Uplift. And we really prefer to be youth driven and youth led. And what that means to us is that there's how that's executed is that there's a youth advisory council. And so we're really considered that we're led by them in such a way. And that's probably why we said earlier that it's really kind of taken on a life of its own, because we'll get feedback from youth and we're like, yes, we're going to go that direction and we're going to go this other. And I mean, we're staying within the mission of the organization, but we're allowing them to guide us and guide the organization, because they're experts on themselves, right? No one knows what it's like to be a youth better than what the youth do themselves. And, you know, sometimes, you know, we think, well, you know, we've been that age before. We know what that's like. Well, you know what? We don't know what it's like to be a teenager through a pandemic. And we don't know what it's like to be an adolescent in the year 2021. And so, you know, I was born in 1976, you know, grew up, you know, I was their age, you know, in the early 90s. And yes, nothing about me without me. Yes, I say that a lot. Deb can attest. I do say that a lot. And so that is one of my favorite sayings. And I started whenever I was working in Oklahoma City in homelessness services, really understanding what that meant and what that slogan meant and what it really encompassed. And so But this next screen is that about adultism. Has anyone heard that term before? Adultism? It's coming up in a lot of the trainings that Deb and I have been to and been to ourselves, attended ourselves. And so if you'd asked me 2 years ago what adultism is, you know, I don't know that I would have been able to tell you. But, you know, a lot of times we feel like, you know, teenagers are hard to work with. And so, and I think it's okay to admit that. I think it's okay to understand that, okay to, you know, acknowledge that. And, you know, friends of mine, you know, will, you know, if I haven't talked to them in a while, they're like, oh, what's she up to, you know, these days? And I'm, you know, telling them a little bit about Uplift. And they're like, you're working with teenagers voluntarily? And I'm like, yes, this is intentionally working with teenagers. And so, so it's kind of funny, but you know, sometimes adults think, you know, we tend to trivialize, you know, what they're experiencing and what they're going through, because we think, oh, well, we've been there, we did that, we did it so well, and this is why you should do it so well too, right? And we have these expectations upon today's youth. But again, you know, we may have been their age ourselves. You know, we were that age at one time, but we weren't that age, you know, well, I guess there are a few younger ones, you know, in the audience here. But, you know, there wasn't internet whenever I was growing up. There wasn't cell phones, you know, not social media. And I can't even imagine, you know, the challenges and the demands that are placed. It's hard enough being a teenager anyway, let alone having to deal with all the technology. And then the particular youth, you know, that we see, if you add those different layers of, you know, being LGBT and so forth on that, this is where someone probably needs to give me that hurry up, go ahead and speed up and speed along there. Deb, are you okay with talking about some of these stats?
Oh, these came out of the LGBTQ needs assessment that I spoke of earlier. So this study, I think the youngest age was 18 and the oldest, I think, was around mid 60s, 64, 65 years old. And it was primarily upstate of South Carolina where the data was from. And so 46% of the people surveyed felt unaccepted by their family. 8% had been kicked out of their home. And there was no age as to when those people had been kicked out of their home. We often hear that it's youth around the ages, you know, of high school graduation. 13% had been cut off from their family financially, so they had no support. And Tana can attest to this. We often see this at Uplift. We actually have a CARES fund at Uplift that we've started, maybe 4 or 5 months ago, because some of our youth, you know, need a tire fixed or need new tires on their car or need mental health, and they don't have a family that well, they might have a family, but they don't have insurance or they don't have support from their family. So we felt the CARES fund was, you know, really a critical need. If somebody needs a computer, if somebody needs to help, you know, with groceries or having their rent paid. So we often see youth that are financially cut off from their family. And 9% were completely disowned. So, which when you think about it, it's pretty devastating because, I mean, I've been a mom, let me think. My oldest child is going to be 43 this Christmas, and I'm still very involved in their lives. And my husband and I offer them support when they need it, whether it's emotional, helping them move, financial, if they're, you know, especially during this pandemic, this last year, it's been hard on some of our family members. So we've always been there for our kids. And so I think this other one, no, I guess this is out of the same study. So 45% of LGBTQ students felt like an outcast. to me, that's devastating. I mean, that is just, and I had put a quote in here earlier just about having a safe space, just to feel like you're part of something and being welcomed. And I know back in the beginning when we started Uplift, in the city of Spartanburg had put it on their Facebook page, and people, I think Tana or I were quoted in the paper as saying, you know, it's just a safe space where we offer no judgment and some hope and some love and some caring. And, you know, some of the naysayers were like, oh, so that's all you need? You just need to give somebody hope. And it's like, sometimes that's all a person needs, you know, to feel uplifted and get back on their feet. They just need a little bit of hope and acceptance. And then the last one, 69% of LGBTQ college students identified a need for information about people in health and education classes. And I don't remember if this included, I think this also included, out of the 69%, college students that also went for mental health services and had to explain to their mental health provider what it was to be pansexual or transgender, and have to educate their mental health provider, which, you know, should not happen. And that's part of the reason we're doing this training, is to get the word out and help folks get educated and, you know, kind of fill their toolbox with what they need. And I would love, and I would love, and I've reached out to some of the team, except it was right around the time of COVID beginning. I would love for USC Upstate to do another study, because now that we've started Uplift, I think the cohort of youth, the data, you know, would be significantly different, I feel, in our area. So yeah, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, you know, so we had mentioned earlier that it's okay to ask questions of people to be able to learn how to, you know, best provide services to them. But there's a difference between asking questions and depending on someone to educate us, right? Because we don't want to put that kind of burden on someone whenever we're in a position to be able to educate ourselves. So there's a little bit of a difference there. Like, questions are okay, of course. And then, you know, how we may say, you know, Deb and I, you know, try to listen, try to bring information from other people, you know, to these type of environments that we're having here and share, you know, that's not going to be representative of everyone. And so those questions are okay to find out, you know, personal preferences and so forth. But again, you know, we have that responsibility to educate ourselves. So, and you all are doing that today. And so kudos to you.
Mm-hmm.
This one, Deb kind of talks a little bit about mental health. I don't know how far you want to dig into that, or if we just want to give folks an opportunity to glance over it. And again, if any of this information, if there's, you know, if you want to dissect it some, if you want to talk about it, if you want to just say, oh, that surprises me, like, or, oh, I thought that number would be higher, or, you know, any, you know, feel free to talk through, you know, any of it. Oh, no problem at all.
I need to put a dog out.
I understand. And so I do tend to be a little bit chatty, and we're running probably a little bit behind with these slides, so I'm going to go ahead and move through here. And so if there's anything that anyone wants to see, most of these next couple of slides where these stats are coming from the Trevor Project. Has everyone heard of the Trevor Project? Trevor Project is huge for LGBTQ teens. And so they run, it's the, I think I can say this right, it's the only hotline in the United States that's solely dedicated to LGBT youth. And so the Trevor Project is really important for the LGBT community and LGBT youth. And so not only do they have a telephone hotline, they have a text hotline where teens can text, or they also have a chat feature online where they can chat. So that's really, you know, good representation of being able to keep up with the times and be able to, you know, listen to what the needs are, because yes, yeah. Deb, are you able to share the hotline and the text number?
I will look it up right now and do it.
Yeah, I don't know why I haven't put a slide in there for that, because and it's something that at Uplift we try to remind the teens of pretty regularly, because just like many of us, we may not pay attention to something whenever we're not in need of a particular information. And it's funny because we'll be talking about something, on and on and on. We feel like we've talked about it, and then we'll mention it and they're like, what's that? And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, how do you not know what this is? Or, whatever the case may be. So this is something that we try to remind them of. And I'm not gonna read these to you. I'm just gonna, have them up while we continue to talk. So conversion therapy. So everyone in the group probably knows what conversion therapy is. And it's absolutely asinine that that's not yet illegal. So as a matter of fact, this stat comes out of the Trevor Project, and Deb and I were recently contacted from folks at the Trevor Project to be able to, they like us to work with them because of some of the conversion therapy programs that still exist here in South Carolina and still exist in the upstate. And so we may not realize that they're there, but they are there, and they are doing a lot of harm to a lot of kids. So Deb posted the Trevor Project website in the chat. And so if you'll just click on that, it gives all of the different hotline and text numbers. And so transgender and non-binary youth, I mean, all LGBT youth are, really extra vulnerable regarding self-harm and suicide. But with transgender and non-binary youth, that goes up, considerably. And so those rates and those prevalence are even higher than their LGBT counterparts. And so here's where this ties in a little bit with the quiz that the little questionnaire at the beginning, is that there are so many terms, right? And these are, ever evolving, and, gender fluid, these are, newer terms, gender queer. I remember the first time that I heard someone say cisgender, and I really didn't know what that meant. And so these are very important terms to be able to know, as a cisgender person myself. So I'm a woman that presents as a woman. And so there's a key to the worksheet. I think that Gretchen was trying to post that. I don't know if she was able to.
Want me to put that? I can put that, the definitions in the chat box. I just didn't know if you wanted to reveal the answers at the end, or if you wanted
it's okay. Yeah.
Okay. You want me to put it in the chat box now?
Sure. And maybe that'll help kind of, shed some light on some of this as well. And, a newer term as well is pansexual. And a lot of times people are like, well, isn't that just the same as bisexual? But, bisexual, even just, in the term itself, insinuates that there's, a binary, right? One and then, the other, and it doesn't allow for folks that are having relationships with transgender folks, and so forth. And so, like I said, I'm 44 years old, so I'm not really in a position where I'm really worried about my label. But whenever you're a teenager and you're really trying to figure out, you know that you're different from folks around you and from your siblings and from your cousins and from your classmates, and you're trying to figure it all out, these terms can be really important because they're trying to, you know, you kind of got to box yourself before you can, grow out of it, later. And maybe that's more important to some than others. But, it's important for them to figure out who they are, and then how they can also be around other folks that they can relate with as well. And so that way they know that they're not the only one that feels that certain way, whatever that may be. And so I usually post, there's this gender unicorn, but I recently came across this one and I thought that it better described it, because I really liked how, so it can get really confusing, even though, we're all grown professional adults, sometimes trying to figure out, okay, so what's the difference between gender and sex and attraction and expression, and, why is someone gender queer and gender fluid, and, and all of these things. And so this, I thought, was a really, captured a lot of those differences that really help a lot. Thank you, Gretchen, for posting that. There you go, Emily. If you haven't seen it, it's in the terms and definitions is in the chat there. I don't know if anyone's heard of the definition, and this gets attached with pansexual, and it reminds me with the heart. And I don't know if that's a gingerbread man, but that's kind of what it looks like to me, or a gingerbread person. But heard the expression like hearts, not parts. And so that's being, I realize that there's a pointer on here. So whenever there's this heart attraction, so gingerbread person, yes. Oh, genderbread person. I gotcha. So thank you for that. And so there's lots of things going on, right? Wild guess. Yeah, I like it. And so there's lots of things going on, right? So there's identity, that's, what it is that I think and I feel. And then there's expression, how I want to express myself, and whether it's attached to a certain gender that's socially constructed, through culturally. And then, how attraction, and then of course biological sex as well. There's often, confusion about whether, if someone's transgender, are they going to be attracted to the same gender that they were attracted to before. And that doesn't necessarily change, but if it does, then it does. Like, it doesn't mean that. So I think a lot of times is that we make those things too complicated, rather than just accepting, someone for as they are. But I think that a lot of people, not all people, but I think a lot of us do that innocently. And so just trying to understand. But whenever you're thinking about people like this, just kind of ask yourself, is this something that I need to know, or is this something that I'm just curious about? Because and a lot of trans folks get that those questions about surgery, right? Like, have you had top surgery and bottom surgery? And well, who else do you go up to and ask about their genitals? And why is that appropriate? And the answer is it's not, right? It's not appropriate. Those questions are not okay. And Deb, so I'm a little bit sleep deprived, you also, and I can be kind of silly whenever I'm sleep deprived. So I hope that this goes as well out of my mouth as it is inside my head. But Deb had mentioned that her transgender son and daughter-in-law are about to have a baby. And so what you can't see about Deb from her hair right now is that most everyone in the Foreman family is redhead. And so, and her daughter-in-law is African American. and she's pregnant, you know, with their child. And I'm like, oh, you know, I just can't wait to see what that baby looks like. And my wife looked at me and she's like, Hannah, like, what? And I'm like, oh yeah, because Sean's not a biological male, but it just doesn't, you know, faze me, you know, because I don't think about, you know, someone's, you know, genitals and so forth. And so I don't know. I hope that comes across the right way, Deb, that I just don't think about it that way. Like, and there's a lot of activism now as a trans man is a man and a trans woman is a woman. And so, and not to, you know, sometimes it's important to be able to recognize
all the time. And, you know, we've heard from parents, you know, oh, it's just a phase. And a lot of parents, I don't know, sometimes I think they're maybe in a moment of denial. My feeling is if your child or youth is experimenting about their gender identity or sexual orientation, then it's probably not a phase. They're trying to figure out who they are. And it's just comforting, I think, to me as a parent who saw my child struggle for a while, to know that society is more open to allowing our youth to explore who they are now and kind of figure it out and see what fits best. So I don't know if that answers your question, Ray, but I'm glad you asked it.
Right. And so I know that that may sound like an oversimplific, you know, oversimplifying it, but it's just a feeling that you have inside you, and it's not something that, you know, I think the thing that makes it so complex, and this is just, you know, I'm not an expert. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not, you know, I don't have, you know, several advanced degrees, but I mean, I do, you know, live this as myself and, you know, have worked with youth for many years. But I think that the thing that makes it most complex is other people, right? It's not them themselves. It's just them trying to deal with how they're going to be themselves with other people, with their parents, you know, and with their classmates and so forth. What we see a lot of times is like, well, when did you have your first boyfriend or girlfriend or crush or whatever the case may be? And they're like, oh, wait, they are the same age I was. And so, you know, because sometimes we tend to, you know, forget. And plus, you know, something that we need to take into consideration is that kids are going through puberty at a lot younger age than what they have, you know, what our parents did or our grandparents did. And so with puberty comes that sexual exploration as well. And so it's just something, I mean, just, we have to understand just the science of it, right? Like that's normal. And whenever we are creating that safe environment, I mean, because, okay, so let's say that we don't create that safe environment, right? And they, you know, decide that they're not, you know, that way. Well, you know what? If they're not able to trust someone in that time of need, you know, do we really want to take that risk of not presenting ourselves as a safe and trusting person, as a parent, as a therapist, as a, you know, a family member? You know, it's not worth that risk. And that's why a lot of times, well, I don't know why I said a lot of times, every time, whenever we get referrals for youth, Deb and I both, and yes, it helps that she's involved with PFLAG as well, but we'd be doing this regardless, is that yes, we'll get them plugged into the youth group. And then we talk to the parent, okay, so now let's talk about support for you, right? Because as Deb said, that maybe, you know, she's really careful not to share her son's story, but she still had her own experience as a parent, right? And so those parents need to be supported as well by their peers. They need to be able to ask those questions, those vulnerable questions, to their peers and not their own children, right? That may internalize whatever, you know, questions the parents may have. And so we believe in that, really, that trickle down effect. If the parents feel supported in their journey, you know, then they're more likely to support their kids as well. All right. Any other questions about that, or any further comments or remarks. Okay, so whenever I is speaking of how things, change generationally, I remember whenever, I was around the age of, adolescence and coming out about my own sexuality, and I heard this, like mind-blowing thing about sexuality being fluid, right? And so what we're realizing and the terminology that we're hearing more of is that gender is fluid as well, right? And so if I came across this is a new graphic that I haven't used before, but I think that it's so Deb's like, whoa, you sprung a new graphic on me. But I think that it just shows how complex it is and why it's important not to put labels and boxes unless again that person is searching for that kind of that validation, right? I mean, that's healthy, but for us to try to understand it, and again, it's not that these youth have a problem with who they are. Whatever problem that they're feeling, whatever burden they're feeling, whatever strain, stress, is from their outside circle, right? And the pressure that they're receiving from the other people in their lives to be able to fit in and to be accepted. And so I really like this graphic because not only is sexuality fluid, I mean, I know that this demonstrates, gender and sexuality and then biological sex too, and just, how just all of these different, variations can take place. But I think, we're learning this is coming into the conversation more and more about how gender is fluid. And I think that that's a really good way for us to think about it and to think that, so the teenager that I was just talking about, how they had come out to their parent as non-binary, and their mom was like, well, I don't understand if they're born female, but they're into makeup and they're into pretty clothes and they're into cute dresses. And so why aren't they just comfortable being a girl? And I'm like, this generation in particular, I feel like more than generations in the past and more than youth that I've worked with in the past, love that exploration about that, back to that genderbread person, is that expression, right? They love to be able to express themselves in certain ways, in different ways. And that may change, from day to day. It doesn't have to be, the same way that, yeah, no problem at all. If whomever needs to leave, don't feel guilty about any of that. And so, anyway, it's all about being a safe person, right? And so we're going to go on a little bit and talk about, so what can I do, right? What can we do as people to be able to say I'm a safe person, right? Because we don't always have those opportunities for those kind of conversations, right? And so these things can be done very, very casually. So you notice that Deb and I put our pronouns, and Emily as well, I noticed, and there may be other people that just aren't in my screen shot area, but we put our pronouns in our Zoom names. And yes, I realize that makes for a very long, name there. And so that's, why oftentimes, I'm usually the only Tana in the room, so that works out well. So I can just put my pronouns, next to my first name there. And I'm seeing more and more people put pronouns with their signature line on their emails. And so if you do things like that, it creates this awareness. And you may think, well, people are going to wonder why I put my pronouns there. Well, you know what? The people that need to know that you're a safe person and need to know that you're accepting and you're tolerant and you're, whatever the case may be, they're going to look for those things. So those things are going to happen. There are ways that we can just casually, be approachable, right? It's going to be more approachable that way. And so a lot of times I'll see with email signatures, and I've even noticed this with people that are, LGBT themselves, is that, they'll have their name, and this is just me being picky, and maybe they have their own thought process for it. But, you know, whenever I introduce myself and I say my name, I immediately say my pronouns, right? And so I suggest that with the email signatures too, because sometimes I'll see people with their name, and then they've got their position, and then they've got the company, and then they've got their telephone number, and then they've got their email address, and then all the way down here at the bottom they have their pronouns. And I'm like, no one's still reading, right? They're not still reading that. And so anyway, I know that that's, you know, really particular, but you know, that's just part of the awareness piece. And I love that you all jumped on and amended your names. So that's really special. And if you think, oh, that's not a big deal, it really is.
Really?
It really is, because you're sending a message, right? And you're getting other people to be thinking about it too. So speaking of, so in addition to my work at Uplift, I also have another job that I work at, and I'm helping them with their volunteer process, right? And so they didn't have a volunteer application, and so I helped them create that. And I put on, so it's not an LGBT center, right? It has nothing to do with LGBT services. And I put on there, I asked for their pronouns. And I had folks in who were like my age, and they were women, and they left it blank. And they said, and so, you know, as I'm very detail oriented, and so you don't leave anything blank, right? You either fill it in or you put NA, right? So I'm printing off this application, I'm going over it, because not only did they leave their pronouns, you know, blank, they left, you know, all of these other questions blank too. And so, you know, I asked them what their pronouns are. They're like, well, what do you mean? And they're offended that I didn't assume, right? And I don't mean to be, you know, talking about, you know, anyone in particular. And so that's why I, you know, don't want to say, you know, where I'm working or any of that kind of stuff. But the point is that that's where privilege comes in, right? To where I'm a cisgender person, where no one's going to question my gender, right? No one's going to question my pronouns. And so my wife is, you know, she's got, you know, shorter hair, and, you know, I guess she's more, this term isn't used as much, you know, I've heard lately, but like, you know, in our generation, more androgynous looking. And so she oftentimes will get sir, and like people will, you know, correct themselves. But anyway, it just helps for people. And you know what, if you're not sure someone's pronouns, it's okay to ask. And another thing that you can do is, whenever you're introducing yourself, use your pronouns. And not only can that be done through electronic, you know, communication, you know, like the Zoom meetings and the emails, but even whenever you're like introducing yourself, you know, to shake hands, whenever it's safe to do that again, you know, hi, I'm Tana, you know, my pronouns are she, her, or I often wear pronoun buttons as well. And so I think just that awareness, you know, keeps other people thinking about that too, and thinking about why that's necessary. And I know I'm talking a lot about it, but pronouns are so important. I mean, Deb, how often do we hear from youth like, you know, my grandma's still not using my pronouns, and they're crying tears about it? Or just the opposite, my dad used the correct pronouns today, and I feel so alive and validated and important and heard and seen. And I mean, so whenever people say, you know, is it really that important? Yeah, you know, the answer is yes, it is that important. And so I know I kind of incorporated some of these things already, you know, into the talk. But, you know, there's different ways to be able to show that you're inclusive and have a safe space. And so whether it's, you know, a sticker on your door or whatever, you know, the case may be, and Gretchen, I'm trying to keep an eye on the time. And if anyone, I know
I didn't want to interrupt you, but it is 11:30, so I did. Yeah, we're a little.
Yeah.
But we have the Zoom room until 12, so
Okay.
I mean, we have plenty of time. It's just if people need to.
Yeah, don't feel, you know, obligated to stick around. So a lot of this is, so this is about, here's a chart that I think is really interesting. And so back, you know, Emily was talking about how important it is, you know, for pronouns as well. And so this kind of puts it, you know, on a graph where you can see, you know, what a difference it makes to people who, you know, feel validated in that way. And I know you're like, oh my gosh, so this is a training about pronouns, you know, but but you know, that's kind of, you know, where we are, you know, in 2021. I think that it's an important conversation, you know, to go on and on about a little bit. So these are just, you know, we've mentioned some of these. If you're not familiar with these organizations, some of them, so this was left on here from we were presenting to some teachers, and so I realized that it's GSA, but since so many of you all, you know, work with, you know, students and, you know, youth, you know, we went ahead and kept them on here. But if you're not familiar with these organizations, they're definitely ones that are good to become familiar with. And so if you, Gretchen, do you mind to play that video that Deb sent you? So this video that Gretchen's pulling up to play. So as Deb and I spoke about before, Uplift opened in August 2019. The fundraiser that we had to be able to afford us to launch the opening was in May of 2019. And so we were, you know, some folks, you know, Uplift Outreach Center is like the perfect name for what we do. So we had a naming contest where, you know, and so it was revealed that night at the event what the name was going to be. And that was a really fun process. But we wanted, I shifted this to the end, Deb, because I thought that it might give them a little bit more idea. And so a lot of people in this room, what we're hearing from adults that are supporting Uplift is they're like, I want to support Uplift because I needed a place like this whenever I was their age. And I want to do what I can do to make sure that this place exists. And so this room is filled with those people that say those things over and over. I love whenever I hear that from people. And so I thought putting this at the end might, you know, after you all have heard about Uplift and heard from us and heard about what we do, it might mean a little bit more. And so I'll be quiet so this can be played. So.
Can you see it okay?
You all need to give yourselves a round of applause because